It was Friday, June 6th, 2025, almost 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Police officers were walking around everywhere with sniffer dogs near a swamp. Actually, it was a muddy bank of Moccasin Creek in the interior of Arkansas, and the dogs started barking differently. Did they find what they were looking for as they were walking there with the police officers? They started to see, among the dense vegetation on the hillside, a tall, broad silhouette covered in mud up to the shoulders. A man who had spent almost 2 weeks hiding in the Ozarks tried to run when he saw the officers approaching him. He took 2, maybe even 3 steps, and that was enough to realize his body had nothing left to give. 13 days without a bed, without guaranteed food, with constant rain and treacherous terrain had taken their toll, a price, actually, that he didn't want to pay, okay? He was knocked to the ground, then handcuffed, hands behind his back, face in the mud. The spokesperson for the Arkansas Department of Corrections was there, took out his phone and photographed the moment. Later, he would tell the press with an almost ironic calm that the guy had been on the loose for a week and a half and probably didn't have any energy left. The identity was then confirmed through fingerprinting. Grant Harding, 56 years old, former police chief, murderer, convicted, rapist, convicted, fugitive, recaptured. Less than a mile and a half from the prison from where he, I would say, creatively managed to escape. So, the devil of the Ozarks was back. I'm Marcos Campos, welcome everyone, and to understand why the whole country at that moment was following that scene. Why did hundreds of agents from multiple agencies spend 13 days tracking a single man in those mountains? We need to go back a bit in time, not just to the escape in May 2025, okay? We need to go back much further. Back to a small town called Gateway, to a man who spent his whole life wearing a uniform he never should have put on. So go ahead and leave a like and a comment and become a member if you can. And let's get to the facts. The man, license plate. Gateway, Arkansas, 450 inhabitants. A small square, a church, houses scattered among green hills. The kind of charming place where everyone knows everyone else's name and where a new face definitely doesn't go unnoticed. In 2016, the city got a new police chief, Grant. He was just over 40 years old, had dark hair, an imposing build, stood 6'3" tall, and weighed 265 pounds. He arrived with a sense of superiority, carrying himself as if the position was too small for what he believed himself to be. And almost immediately, people in Gateway noticed that something was very wrong there. Practically overnight, the city changed. Grant would chase cars for no apparent reason, point his gun at the very citizens there, and intimidate anyone who crossed his path. Then a resident who would lose her brother because of him years later summed things up well. Everything there just went downhill really fast after this guy became police chief, but Grant hadn't come out of nowhere. For the previous 35 years, he had worked as a police officer in several cities in northwest Arkansas. At his first job in Fayetteville, he ran into problems with supervisors almost immediately, and he was fired. After that, he got a position in Huntsville, where he stayed for about 6 months before resigning. Next, he went to Eureka Springs, and that's where the pattern became clearer. The former police chief of Eureka said that Grant resigned because he was about to be fired for incidents involving excessive use of force. In this man's view, Grant simply shouldn't have been a police officer at all, but the system kept hiring Grant. City after city, department after department, cada nova chance servindo de a stepping stone, let's say, to the next one, until 2016. A small and unsuspecting city called Gateway put up a sign with his name on the door of the police chief's office. The position lasted 4 months. The victim, Appleton, was 59 years old and worked in the water supply department of Garfield, a nearby small town. There, in Gateway, He was the kind of man people describe with just a few words, but always the same ones. A straightforward guy, honest, not afraid to say what he thought. And that's exactly what put him in Grant's path. In the spring of 2016, James confronted Grant directly about the repair of a police car. It wasn't a private argument. It happened in public for everyone to see. A lieutenant from the neighboring county's department described several occasions, including when the two actually came to blows, going at each other, in a hostility that only grew with each encounter. For a man like Grant, that wasn't just a work argument, it was a personal affront. Someone had dared to challenge him publicly, a regular citizen, and on top of that, a City Hall employee. Maybe the worst part of all was that the guy was right. That's not good. The city council over in Gateway came to the same conclusion that the residents had already reached weeks earlier. They gave an ultimatum to the police chief, who was already a troublemaker, already causing too much trouble. Either you resign, buddy, or we're going to fire you. Grant, ever proud, resigned. He left quietly, without direct confrontation, without a scene. He just left, but definitely it wasn't over inside him. 9 months later, James Appleton was dead. February 23rd. It was a Thursday afternoon. James pulled his car over to the side of the road near Garfield. The reason was completely trivial. His cell phone signal wasn't working in that area, so he stopped the car to try to find a signal. He wanted to make a call to his brother-in-law, who at the time was the mayor of Gateway. To avoid losing the call, James stopped the car in an open area where the signal was a little more stable. In the middle of that conversation, he mentioned a white car that had stopped on the road and was starting to go around him. His brother-in-law heard the comment and then heard what sounded like a door slamming. Then there was silence. Outside, a local resident named John was passing by the road when he saw this scene. He was coming back from work when he spotted James's pickup truck parked there on the side of the road. With that white car right behind it, the driver of the white car signaled for him to go ahead. So John went ahead and then heard a very loud noise. Actually, he looked in the rearview mirror and saw the white car speeding away. He went back to check what had happened. That's when he found James unconscious in the driver's seat of his car. James had been shot in the head. The white car that was there causing all this trouble, as you might guess, belonged to Grant. The security cameras there recorded what happened next. Later that same night, Grant took his wife and daughter out to dinner at the restaurant. He told his family that if anything were to happen, he wanted them to know that he loved them, and it was that same night, actually, that a police officer went there. Grant was already being detained based on the testimony and the camera footage, while the officers were still working at the crime scene, and he was taken in for questioning. He invoked his right to remain silent. He didn't say a word. In October 2017, Grant pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no stated motive and no remorse. Nothing, just silence, which he had learned to use as a shield throughout his entire life. Actually, it becomes clear that it was a personal act of revenge on his part, because of what had happened there, right? The matter of his dismissal, the past that had been lying dormant in a database. When someone convicted of a violent crime like that enters the American prison system, at least their DNA is catalogued. It goes into the database there. It's basically a bureaucratic step, almost automatic by then. A swab, some test tubes, a code sent to the federal database, which can find genetic profiles of criminals from all over the country. In Grant's case, that routine procedure opened a door that had remained closed for 2 decades. It was 1997. Going back in time, a primary school teacher in Rogers, a city in Arkansas, was also raped inside her own school. The investigation went nowhere, so the case remained in the files as an unsolved crime. The name was there, on a list of victims who never got an answer. The teacher survived, carried that trauma for decades, and the man who did that kept getting hired as a police officer, as we saw. But the DNA collected there in prison matched the DNA from the crime scene back in '97. In February 2019, Grant also pleaded guilty to 2 counts of rape and received another 50 years in prison, 30 for the murder, 50 for the rape. That's 80 years in total now. A prosecutor who helped put Grant behind bars said that cases like this are always shocking because they involve someone who was supposed to protect people. It's true that security agencies have their bad apples, just like anywhere else in life. Anywhere, guys, there's always something that ends up spreading evil, but Grant was something really out of the ordinary. That guy said he was a truly rotten apple, one that really contaminated everything. There, people were afraid of him. He was a troublemaker, a complicated guy. In fact, whoever stood up to him ended up losing their life at his last job. Well, but getting back to talking about the crime for which this guy was arrested, and that led to the discovery of these other crimes. The victim's family was trying to move on, especially his sister. You remember he was the mayor's brother-in-law, right? Well, his sister later ended up becoming mayor, and she summed up what the whole city was feeling more or less. That a man like Grant should never have been anywhere near a badge. That the system had failed miserably and repeatedly, and now he was finally in jail, but only until May 2025 he did it himself. It was Sunday, May 25th, 2025, 2:55 in the afternoon. The North Central Unit in Calico Rock was a medium security prison in the interior of Arkansas, surrounded by mountains, about an hour away from any big city. It operated there with the predictable routine of any institution of its kind. Regular shifts, periodic searches, cameras scattered throughout the hallways. And what about Grant in all this? Since he had been locked up there for a while, he started working inside. The guy did odd jobs in the kitchen. He was someone who kept to himself, just observing the whole routine. Pretty sly in his own evil way. And I'll tell you more details about that in a moment. And it was from that prison, on a certain Sunday, that I'm telling you about. He walked out the front door, but not because his sentence was over. Far from it. The surveillance cameras there recorded the whole scene. Grant pushing a hand truck with wooden pallets, wearing a dark uniform, the kind used by the officers at that penitentiary, just like many of the officials working there. The security gate opened and let the coworker pass through. No one checked his identity, no one asked for any documentation. The man was there, just chilling, wearing their uniform, looking relaxed, pushing a cart, right? What could go wrong there? In a predictable routine, like I told you, he went unnoticed. The authorities later concluded that the uniform wasn't official. It had been improvised by Grant. And then comes that part I told you about, those guys who use it for evil purposes. Just look at that. He had managed to get some markers with that strong ink from somewhere inside the prison. Since he was working in the kitchen, probably also in the laundry, he did some work in the laundry. Just look at that. He took several, and somehow he managed to dye his prison uniform, which was supposed to be white, and then he painted it the color of the officers' uniforms, you know, the correctional officers. And he took a can lid from the kitchen and managed to mold it into the shape of a badge that he put on. First, just watch. And then he came up with the whole plan to take the cart, load it up, acting like he wasn't up to anything, and went completely unnoticed. You might wonder how he managed to do that without anyone noticing. He did it gradually, like in a movie, and kept going, even dyed the thing. Then he would hide it, supposedly in a trash can that was there. I don't know if it was in the cell or somewhere else, but he managed to keep it there and nobody checked. Just reminding you that it was a medium security penitentiary, right guys? So I don't really know what the routine was like there anyway. That's where he kept it. Then he took an apron, which was already black, from the kitchen, and he made it into a kind of vest, man. He put the uniform together right there and he slipped by unnoticed. You get it, right? The more out in the open it is, the less people notice it, since he pulled this off. And so that basic routine. There, people start falling into this, how do I put it? It becomes so automatic that you stop noticing the details. And anyway, he managed to get out of prison like that. So supposedly he didn't have anyone's help either, okay? But anyway, he got out, started running away, and they only realized he had left there. or rather that he had left there 2 hours later. Then, the department spokesperson admitted to a major process failure, right? Someone should have checked Grant's identity before opening the gate, a completely basic step, right? To open the gate of a prison, damn. But it wasn't done, and Grant disappeared. In the Ozark Mountains, 13 days in the mountains. The news spread beyond Arkansas in just a few hours. A former police chief, convicted of murder and rape, escaped from prison using a fake uniform that he made himself and disappeared into the mountains of northern Arkansas. And the local county sheriff there said he feared for people's safety. That Grant, was a dangerous guy, that he could hurt someone else, and that this whole mess with the system could end up even worse. The search then was immediate, very intense. Helicopters, drones, dogs, agents on horseback, everyone. Even the U.S. Marshals announced their involvement. Marshals are an elite tactical unit. Okay, patrol and all that anyway, guys, everyone is involved. FBI, there was a reward. There was everything you can imagine. But the place where he escaped to is really hard to find, right? Mountains and all, rough terrain, full of caves, old abandoned buildings, dense vegetation. So in the first few hours, the rain also started to fall. And it made things even worse. For example, the trail he might have left, and the dogs there were having trouble tracking the guy. So the days started to go by. The authorities asked residents in the area to lock their houses and vehicles. Warnings were issued in several counties. Neighbors there started reporting supposed sightings all over Arkansas and even in Missouri, the neighboring state, but nothing was confirmed. On the 10th day, the Department of Corrections did something unusual. They released an illustration of how Grant might look at that moment, possibly with a short beard and mustache. A man almost 6'3", over 220 pounds, brown hair, blue eyes. Hard to go unnoticed, right? If the guy was just hanging around, especially in small towns, someone would have seen him. But even so, 13 days of intense searching, hundreds of people involved, but nothing concrete found less than 2 kilometers away. You know what's the weirdest part of this whole story? Because just like he went through the gate, the guy opened it and said, "Go ahead, take your card away." Then, that outfit looks kind of weird, right? But he just left, man.
Eu já vou contar.
I've already given the title here, but anyway, it was Friday, guys, June 6th, around the middle of the afternoon. The sniffer dogs were taken to an area near Moccasin Creek, which is a very muddy region, swampy there, on the banks of a stream in Izard County. The water had risen in the last few weeks because of the rain, right? Making the agents' work there much more difficult. But that day, the water level had dropped and the trail was there. The dogs picked up the scent. Finally, agents moved up the slope. That tall and broad silhouette appeared in the vegetation. Remember I mentioned it at the beginning? Well, Grant tried to run when he saw everyone arriving there. But the guy was exhausted. 13 days in the mountains, he was completely out of energy. He was taken down, handcuffed, put there with his face in the mud. In short, what was in his own soul got mixed in there too. The Border Patrol recorded everything in photos. Grant was lying face down, hands tied behind his back. Handed over to the Arkansas State Police without injuries, his identity was confirmed. Part of the bureaucracy there was done by fingerprinting. 13 days after walking out the front door of a prison wearing a homemade disguise, Grant was finally found. But here's the thing I told you about, which is ironic, right? Just like he left, he was found only 2 kilometers from where he escaped. Think about it, the guy searching everywhere while he was hiding. The guy was right next to the prison. Imagine the amount of resources that were mobilized, and the guy was there, right next to the prison. 13 days, well, after that, Grant was transferred to a maximum security unit in Arkansas, where he remains to this day. And James's sister, Grant's victim's sister, remember her? She became mayor, she's from Gateway and everything. So she got a call letting her know that they had managed to catch the guy, recapture him. She said it was a huge relief because the whole family was very anxious, afraid of retaliation, I don't know, something like that. And finally, now they were more at ease. And put the guy in maximum security, right? A murderer, a rapist. All of this also triggered requests for clarification in the local prison system. After all, damn, they're going to need to take a look at the security procedures. How does the guy open the prison gate without checking anything? Well, guys, here we are in the year 2026. Grant, regarding all this mess, pleaded guilty to escape. He admitted what he had done and got another 13 years in prison, which will be consecutive to what he already had to serve. Funny, the guy got 13 years here. Sometimes you don't even get 13 years for homicide. Now, the final result was a sentence of 93 years, adding it all up for a man who spent decades wearing uniforms he didn't deserve to wear, who used the authority of the state to intimidate citizens, who killed a man who simply had the courage to disagree with him. And it was certain that he raped a teacher and lived with impunity for 20 years while he kept receiving badges. In other words, the guy became sick with the power he had and nobody did anything. But, I don't know. Looking at it now, it seems like it had an ending. Maybe a fair one, a 93-year sentence, and maybe there's even a poetic touch to it, because he tried to escape the disgrace he was by wearing a uniform. Maybe that's the philosophy of it. And then, later, where was he found? In the mud, dirty, less than 2 kilometers from the prison. And then, the devil of the Ozarks had nowhere else to run. Ironically, he was literally arrested where his soul had always been, in the mud. That's it, guys. Leave a comment for me. If you already knew about this case, let me know your opinion. How is it possible it's not even a real jail?
É assim, pra gente que é brasileira.
It doesn't sound that strange to me, but that's just my opinion. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments. Thanks for your company, a kiss from the redhead, and see you next episode.